the most important film about the state of Western masculinity in recent memory. The 1999 classic painfully highlights the greatest disease of our civilization, namely the emasculation of the Western man.
We're still men.
Yes, we're men. Men is what we are.
Over the course of its narrative, the film offers the viewer a radical antidote to this disease. It presents the philosophical concept of the Nietzschean Übermensch. The nameless protagonist of Fight Club, simply described as the narrator, embodies a typical late 20th century American consumer. His life is dedicated solely to the acquisition of wealth, which he invests in the products of international mega corporations.
I'd flip through catalogs and wonder, what kind of dining set defines me as a person?
He has been thoroughly emasculated by the egalitarian conformity of postmodern society, which has left him fearful, lazy, and entirely mediocre. Nihilism has corrupted his soul to a point where he cannot identify a clear purpose for his existence. His lived experience is an endlessly repeating loop of insignificant events split between the offices of his employer, business trips, and the suffocating comfort of his IKEA-furnished apartment.
Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy.
This vicious cycle of meaninglessness turns the narrator into a chronic insomniac. He seeks comfort in a self-help group for survivors of testicular cancer. Here he meets a group of disillusioned men who suffered through actual emasculation as a result of their disease. This male safe space becomes a form of escapism for the narrator, where he can feel good about himself by feeding off the misery of others. This proves to be a temporal arrangement though. The distortion of reality evaporates immediately when a girl named Marla Singer joins their group. This reminds the protagonist subconsciously of his own emasculation. Secretly he is attracted to her, but remains in denial about this fact to avoid facing his own impotence. His insomnia resurfaces, which results in dissociative identity disorder.
If you wake up at a different time, in a different place, could you wake up as a different person?
This is where the plot introduces Tyler Durden, who is, unbeknownst to the narrator, a projection of his deranged mind. Tyler represents his innate desire to overcome emasculation and nihilism. This becomes the main conflict of the narrator's character arc. His old impotent self struggles against his new hypermasculine identity for dominance. Ultimately, the story is about becoming who one really is. Tyler's strategy to guide his other half towards enlightenment is preaching a contemporary interpretation of Nietzschean philosophy. The film itself functions as an allegory for the philosopher's 19th century magnum opus, the book Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The central story here revolves around the character Zarathustra, who preaches to the great unwashed masses that God is dead and therefore man has to evolve or be annihilated. In it, Nietzsche also offers a harsh critique of Western Christianity. According to him, its most emphasized value was humanity's search for truth, which it offered in form of its own dogma. This caused civilization to perpetually seek truth, which culminated in the discovery of the scientific method and the emergence of the Age of Enlightenment in the 18th century. This in turn resulted in the decline of Christianity in the West. The implication of this was a dark one, however, because the refutation of this highest of all beliefs created cynicism towards all other supposed meta-truths and values. Existential nihilism, the belief that there is no objective meaning to existence, has become the dominant quasi-religion of Western civilization ever since. Zarathustra warns the masses about the dangers of nihilism, as the disability of values leads to the era of the so-called last man. A period in which man stagnates because of his lack of purpose. He therefore turns away from creation towards endless consumption and apathy. At this point we return to Fight Club and to the narrator, who represents the contemptible last man. His attitude is cynical and pessimistic, despite the supposed fulfillment he finds in mindless consumption. Deep down, however, he is aware that his time is slowly running out and he's achieving nothing in the process.
This is your life, and it's ending 1 minute at a time.
His namelessness, or in other words interchangeability, echoes the masses of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. They are also aware that they are numbing the chronic meaninglessness of their lives with hedonistic consumption. Greater men, such as Zarathustra himself, or those who take action and create, are secretly envied but publicly ridiculed. People end up conforming to the mediocrity of their neighbors, either because they fear the public shaming or are just outright lazy, which applies to most men. This exemplifies Nietzsche's idea of slave morality, which entails a mindset of obedience, patience, and humility. The result is postmodern society as we know it, which preaches weakness and pacifism as virtues and elevates victimhood to sainthood. The weak despise the strong and therefore start to attack their achievements with vitriolic slander. The masses eradicate individualism from within and turn Western civilization into an egalitarian and declining nightmare. Tyler Durden takes on the role of Zarathustra in the internal dialogue of the narrator and preaches to himself about the decline of civilization.
Murder, crime, poverty, these things don't concern me. What concerns me are celebrity magazines, television with 500 channels, some guy's name on my underwear, Rogaine, Viagra, Olestra.
Martha Stewart.
Fuck Martha Stewart. Martha's polishing the brass on the Titanic. It's all going down, man.
He rejects the notion that the accumulation of property by mindless labor can be an inherently meaningful task, as it rather takes away from our ability to focus on pursuits that really matter.
Things you own end up owning you.
In a cataclysmic event, the apartment of the narrator is destroyed by an explosion, which accelerates his personal transformation. This readjusts his focus onto self-actualization, a process which he visualizes in his interactions with Tyler. A key aspect of Tyler's approach is the theme of self-destruction, or as he puts it,
Self-improvement is masturbation. Now self-destruction. Excuse me.
he encourages the narrator to punch him after their first meeting in Lou's tavern. This escalates into a full contact fight. This kind of rough play breaks up the inner wiring of the last man type narrator. According to Nietzsche, the emergence of existential nihilism coincides with the return of death anxiety. Western man has lost his faith in the afterlife as a positive outlook. The suffering experienced throughout a lifetime is therefore amplified because there is no heavenly salvation to comfort the pain. Postmodern civilization is mostly concerned with numbing this exact pain. It denies suffering as a critical element of the human experience, demonizes any form of violence, and promotes hedonistic escapism. The desire to build a society that denies the value of pain and suffering is a deeply utopian one, which leads to the constant expansion of the state. It offers to protect its citizens from death while simultaneously providing pleasure and comfort. Nietzsche is disgusted by this idea, as he believes that the state turns human beings into mere herd animals that live ignorant of their own mortality and without purpose. Instead, he proposes to face one's own mortality head-on, which is necessary to overcome death anxiety. He rejects the otherworldliness that both Christianity and the secular state offer to mankind. The fight with Tyler introduces the narrator to the idea of embracing pain and suffering as something that is as much part of the human experience as pleasure and comfort. Self-help groups only served him to deny the inevitable physical destruction of his human body. Fights, on the other hand, allow him to confront his own impermanence.
Hey, even the Mona Lisa's falling apart.
This sort of rewiring becomes very appealing to other last man types that witness the narrator fighting himself.
Hey guys.
They too are castrated by the life-denying, comfort-seeking and escapist culture of corporate America. Within a few weeks, a fight club is founded where men meet to fight on a weekly basis. In the basement of Lou's tavern, the disaffected men find spiritual salvation in violence, for they rediscover the purpose of masculinity. The evolution of testosterone was not an accident. A man's natural traits are increased strength and aggression. This was essential to protect and provide for one's offspring, a role without which civilization would have never been possible. Contemporary society supplants the traditional role of the individual man with the state monopoly on violence. Consequentially, it feminizes men by suppressing their biological tendencies. Some men, however, will never be pacified. The truth of the matter is that men were created to suffer. Men were born to fight, and therefore, men were born to create. Creation, however, is not a passive process, as it requires the input of force. Nietzsche once formulated, every creation requires some form of destruction. The Übermensch is aware that his life will end in annihilation, so he overcomes the plain will to live and rather embraces the will to power. He shapes his environment through force to create something that will outlast his short existence. But in order to do that, he has to accept enduring pain, suffering, and destruction as part of the process. The frustrated last men discover two truths in Fight Club. The first is that they have to confront hardship to truly accept the inevitability of death. The second is that they have to destroy their postmodern self-conception before overcoming their emasculation to create something new. It is revealed that Tyler set the narrator onto this path by destroying his old condo. This forcibly detaches the protagonist from his materialistic obsession and is the first step towards destroying his postmodern self-conception. Tyler, however, understands that rejecting materialism and joining a fight club is not quite enough to fundamentally repolarize the narrator.
Say this about Marley. At least she's trying to hit bottom.
What? And I'm not.
Sticking feathers up your butt does not make you a chicken.
A part of him is still clinging onto his former self, because in his core he is still fearful, which prevents him from taking any meaningful action.
What are we doing tonight?
Tonight? We make soap.
Tyler emphasizes the act of human sacrifice as the ultimate expression of heroism in the face of certain annihilation. Enduring and accepting the value of pain is a trait of higher men. The narrator, however, is initially incapable of that, despite him claiming to be enlightened.
What is this?
This is a chemical burn. The first soap was made from the ashes of heroes, like the first monkey shot into space. Without pain, without sacrifice, we would have nothing.
What Tyler achieves in this scene is highlighting the dilemma of existential nihilism. If God has abandoned us, we are faced with two options. We can either escape from reality, or we can face the fact that nobody but ourselves will save us from our mortal suffering. To choose the latter, one has to be clear-minded and brave. Fear, on the other hand, would only lead back to the former.
You have to consider the possibility that God does not like you. He never wanted you. In all probability, he hates you. You have to know, not fear, know that someday you're gonna die.
You don't know how this feels.
It's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything.
Nietzsche himself believed that the highest must come to its height out of the deepest depth, meaning that man has to hit bottom to truly grasp the finiteness of his own existence. Only then can he positively embrace his short life and evolve into the Übermensch, who creates his own purpose and takes action to fulfill it.
Congratulations. You're one step closer to hitting bottom.
Tyler continues to introduce the other men of Fight Club to the idea that they belong to a generation of last men who have been turned into a homogeneous herd of Western consumers, misguided by a set of false expectations.
Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate so we can buy shit we don't need. We're the middle children of history, man. No purpose or place. We have no great war, no great depression. Our great war is a spiritual war. Our great depression is our lives.